We will begin by reciting the opening prayers. Can you all hear me? Can you hear me? Please raise your hands if you can hear me. I think you can't hear me. Now, please raise your hands if you can hear me. Today, it seems that the internet connection is not so good.
Sen gelinde bu girişinin şu an şimdi işi yazı dinleme tuşen çoğu lamara çağge 시작하라 이런 경우는 세배하는 düzenine bu gibi demokrasinin bu yerin bu şala çağsa 인도 집에 보이려면 로레 집에 죽은 뒤에서 주바지 주르지 않는 로자 집에 잘라서 안 되도 집에 그러서 이제 가지 집에 나만 집에 돈을 집에 레바 집에 잘라서 안 되고 집에 좀 시작해 좀 또 공원도 주실래 집에 가다니 뭐 이금 집에 잘라서 반대 도시 생활을 그 좋아하면 가면 인구를 그 이제 스지 변조 이런 뭐 틀려고 이제 뭐 최종 변제 점을 내주 스지 그 변조 좀 다음에 도시 경화라 반대 자야는 말은 뭐지 다가 지구를 변매 대쇼라 그린 신bio 권의 제송도 구성도 영으로 자도 다디 디디는 가로도 다
Seems like it's kind of breaking up a bit. Can you hear me? Oh, okay.
다 도마데리아 아주 근데가게 에 근데 남발에
So
엔다
first of all, to all of the members of the Sangha in the monasteries and nunneries, everyone in the Dharma centers, and all of our Dharma friends around the world, I would like to begin by offering you my greetings. So today is the 8th day of our teachings. So what we are discussing today is the age of philosophy. Now, as I introduced the other day, during the later Vedic period, if we divide it, there are three different sections. And the first part of these is the four Vedas, the third is the Brahmanical period, and the third is the age of philosophy. So we're speaking about this in terms of the three parts. So today, what we're speaking about is the age of philosophy. Now, when we talk about this age of philosophy, the situation was that the Aryan peoples had already extended outward from the Ganges, outward from Punjab to the Ganges River Valley, and then they began to extend outward, take more area around from the Ganges River Valley. So they covered a larger area. Now, whether we think about politics or literature, the traces left by this time are among the greatest in the history of Indian civilization. They really stand out. If we speak about this in terms of politics, there is the region of Magadha. From the beginning of the Brahmanical area, from the time of the end of the area when the Brahmana texts were appearing, the region of Magadha was a region that everyone knew about. And so when we came to the age of philosophy, then the region of Magadha was a place where advances were occurring at an even more rapid pace. So if you take a look at this map, I think you can probably understand. It's not quite working well today. So this is the Ganges River Valley here, right? And so they moved into this Ganges River Valley and then became larger and larger. And so it shows this differently colored region of the map. So they eventually covered this entire area. And what this map shows is shows the so it shows the six great kingdoms. So these are six great kingdoms that appeared during this era. And so Magadha is here. So Magadha was in this area, and it became very important. The reason is that, as I explained before, from the time of the Brahmanical era, everyone knew about the region of Magadha. And during the age of philosophy, then Magadha then developed even more rapidly than before. And eventually, all of northern India came under the control of this kingdom of Magadha. And so Magadha itself became a cultural and political hub. Later, when the Buddhist teachings were appeared, the main area where it was established and again got a foothold was in Magadha. Likewise, there was the Emperor Chandragupta, who was renowned as being like a Chakravarti, a universal emperor. And he also appeared in this kingdom, the kingdom of Magadha. So for this area, if we're thinking about northern India, or you can also say that the center, of course, is basically the center. So in this central India, Magadha is a country in central India. So this is a great country of that. Now, also in South India, there was this is the area, there's the kingdom of Andhra, in the area of Andhra Pradesh. So in that region of Andhra, there was the kingdom of Andhra. And it also became another hub of politics and culture. Sometimes there are some encounters between the civilization, the culture of Andhra and the culture of Magadha. Likewise, there are also connections with the Dravidian civilizations from lands even further to the south. And so these peoples were probably the Dravidians who had been exiled from the Aryan, exiled by the Aryans. So this became a third great kingdom. In any case, at that time, there became three powerful kingdoms. And so then out of this, there developed the six great kingdoms. So gradually, individual Indian civilization was able to cover the entire geographical area of India. So first the Aryans came to the northwest of India, but the other areas, their civilization didn't spread to the entire geographical area. But gradually, the Indian this culture was able to spread to all the geographical areas of India. So I think it's best to start to be speaking about the kingdom or dynasties of Magadha. Now, to speak about the kingdom of Magadha, this is Magadha. So in the map here, it is this more brownish color, but sometimes it was a little bit larger and sometimes smaller. So for that reason, when we talk about Magadha, it's like the most important kingdom in ancient India. And during this age, or the age of philosophy, it was not only a cultural and political hub for all of India, also became an important center of Buddhism, where Buddhism spread widely. The the Bhagavan Buddha, spent over half of his life in Magadha, and also the councils in Shravasti and Pataliputra were also all convened in this kingdom of Magadha. So, in terms of Buddhism, Magadha is one of the most well-known lands in an important country. So, Magadha is where its location is in the lower reaches. If you talk about the upper and the lower reaches of the Ganges Valley, it's in the lower reaches of the Ganges River Valley. So basically, most of the areas of eastern India were formerly regions in Magadha. But the size of the country of Magadha fluctuated greatly during the different dynasties that ruled it. And so you can't say that it's not always definitely one area. There were times when it covered the entire culture, the entire area of northern India and many areas of the south. And so it was a very powerful and large country. So it is difficult to say that its area had what exactly where its area always was. But in any case, it was a very ancient kingdom and a very important kingdom in the history of India. Now, yesterday I mentioned the Indian Purana histories, the tales of the past, you could say in English. I'm going to talk about the Purana, or the tales of the past. This is like the name of a category or a genre of Indian literature. So there are many different texts within this category. So it has quite extensive content, discusses many issues, primarily how the universe was formed, how the different types of gods appeared, how the kings appeared, and also the various religious movements and so forth. All of these are described in the Puranas. So these Puranas have many legends and philosophy. And they describe events related to religion and so forth. Now, the Puranas that are still, there are many Puranas that are still extant. And the time when they appeared was probably not, they date to a time not too long after the Buddha passed away. So these Puranas, as I said, mentioned the other, there are so many different types of literature I've mentioned the other day. So if we compare the Puranas to them, these are a later genre of literature, but I don't need to speak too much about them right now. Still, the Puranas are very important, And for the reasons when we're speaking about the points of the ages of philosophy, we need to use the Puranas as historical sources. So next, when I speak about the history of Magadha, I have to take what is described in the Puranas as the basis for the discussion. Now, the first dynasty in Magadha was called the Haryanka. Now, this dynasty, even before the Haryanka dynasty, it's quite likely that there was a country or a kingdom of Magadha before this dynasty. But the available historical sources do not clearly indicate that there was a country before the Haryanka. So for that reason, I'm putting the Haryanka as the first dynasty. Now, this Haryanka dynasty reigned in Magadha for over 200 years. And during these over 200 years, there were 10 kings. And so this period, so that the Buddha was born during this period, is also the time of the 16 powerful kingdoms. So this is the time when this occurred, as during this dynasty. Now, the second dynasty is called the Shaishanaga dynasty. It's called the Shaishanaga dynasty. So Shaishanaga, this Shaishanaga dynasty reigned in Magadha for 60 years, and during these 60 years, there were 2 kings. Now, of course, here about this topic, scholars have different explanations of this period. However, for the time being, we don't need to speak about that. And this was also during the time of the 16 powerful kingdoms. Now, the third era was the time of called the Nanda dynasty. The Nanda is the word, and it means like joyful. And so this dynasty reigned in Magadha for 100 years, and over these 100 years, there were 10 kings. Now, the fourth dynasty was the Chandragupta dynasty. So Chandragupta established the Maurya dynasty, which and took over and controlled Magadha. So the Emperor Ashoka was actually the grandson, was probably the grandson of Chandragupta. So that is a very brief introduction to the country of Magadha. And we will speak about many different events related to this, such as the birth of the Buddha and so forth. So what I would like to introduce next are the sutras. Now, these sutras after the Upanishads had appeared, what the Brahmanas did is they continued to preserve their ancient forms and ancient customs. Similarly, the Brahmins also continued to perform the sacrificial offerings as like their mainstay, as like a symbol of being a Brahmin. And so they considered performing these rituals and offerings very important. Likewise, all the common people also felt that performing rituals had become like a part of their life. So you do the rituals and it's part of your life. So they became a part of their way of life. And so for this reason, they continued to perform the rituals and they couldn't give them up. And so what the Brahmins did is that many different philosophies had developed and appeared, and these led to a lot of doubts and suspicions about the rituals conducted by the Brahmins. And so the Brahmanical understand, or the Brahmanical. And so the Brahmins wanted to preserve their rank and their status stably in society. And they also wanted to also to be able to give a traditional education to the future generations. And so what they did is that they established a stages in an education. They codified the different hierarchies and responsibilities. So they made like rules for each of the different castes. What were the Brahmas supposed to do? What were the Kshatriyas supposed to do? And so they codified all these rules. So if we talk about them these days, they became like topics of study in school, like the modern subjects we study in school. And so they made textbooks for this. And so what were these textbooks? The way these textbooks were written is that they had very, very concise words. They were mainly in verses, and they're very concise. And so this is a new genre of literature that they called sutras. So in Tibetan, they're called Do. So in Sanskrit, they're called sutras. Now, when you say sutra, sutra means like a thread. It means the thread, and and linguistically, its root is the word sieve. So it comes originally from the root sieve. So it's like making, which means to sow. The sieve means to sow. So it's like the thread. It's like making a thread in a garden of flowers. So when you take the original vast meaning and you condense it into a few words, you have very complicated meaning, and you condense it into just a few words to explain it. So this genre of teaching that was called the sutras. Now, the reason it was they were written so concisely, so that instead of having a lot of elaboration and complications, they wanted to be able to teach anything, whether the rules or the customs or so forth. They wanted to teach them in concise words that people could remember, and so they wrote these new texts that were in very short and concise words. Now, the earliest of the sutras probably appeared in the 6th century BCE. So the earliest sutras probably were completed in the 6th century BCE. And the latest appeared around the turn of the millennium, around the beginning of the Common Era. And their content was, as I included, like the content of the Brahmanas that I described yesterday, and it basically repeats the content of that. Basically, they're essentially like another iteration of the Brahmanas. Now, of course, there's a little bit of new content, but most of it is like repeating the points taught in the Brahmanas. So for that reason, there's not a whole lot of difference between them and the earlier Vedic literature. But their particular quality is that the Brahmanas are very long. They're in prose and they're very complicated, but the sutras are not like that. The quality of the sutras is that they're really concise and simple. This is like the special feature of the sutras, and they're often made into verse. They weren't long like in prose. The reason why they're made into short stanzas was for children, because they are giving education to children, right? So when we mean children, we mean like children from the age of 8 or 9. It had to be something that the children could easily memorize. Memorizing prose is harder. It's difficult to memorize prose, and so they made the stanzas. Because it had been prepared in stanzas, it was made easier for people to memorize. So for at that time, people were primarily thinking of the practice. They're thinking if it's all these long things, you want something you can memorize, something that you can join to your mind. And so they were written in the form of verse. So generally, there are many different sutras. There are many different of these sutras. And there are also different types of, even with the sutras, there are many different because it's like textbooks. There are the textbooks used in one book and one school, the textbooks used in another school. There are many different textbooks, right? So it's similar with this. With the sutras, there are many different traditions of sutras, and even within each tradition, there are many different sutras. So one thing that is actually kind of disappointing for us is that most of these sutras have been lost. They aren't extant anymore. So for that reason, what we have now are these. So what is remaining are so only a few remain. Most of them have been lost. But in order to study the sutras, what we first need to understand, though, so what were the different types of traditions or philosophical schools that had arisen at that time? And so for that reason, so I need to give you an introduction to the different types of philosophical schools. So there were three different types of these philosophical schools. And the first section is the six branches of the Vedas. So when you talk about, so this is a philosophical school, you could say, or the tenets, or there's like a tradition of preserving. And what it primarily is in order to preserve the root Vedas. So that is how the six branches of the Vedas appeared. Now, each of these branches had its own tradition. And within each of them, there are many different sutras in each of these different areas. But only a few of these sutras remain. So to describe them in general, these are the six branches of the Vedas. And so the first is ritual, the second is reading, the third is poetics, the fourth is etymology, the fifth is grammar, and the sixth is astrology. So I will talk about these in detail later. Now, the second section are the six. We call them the six sophist schools, or we call them the six philosophies. And so this time, the six philosophies are among these six philosophies are ones that have become well known among in Buddhist literature. And so these six soft schools, or the six philosophicals, the first one is the Samkhya, the second is the Yoga, third is Nyaya, fourth is Vaisheshika, fifth is Mimamsa, and the sixth is Vedanta. And so you could say that this is like the second tradition of sutras. Now, the third tradition of sutra is for the two religions. And what are these two? It is Jainism and Buddhism. Now, the Jain and the Buddhist religions are generally the place where they're based upon, or where their seeds are found in the philosophical texts in the Upanishads. So that seems to be like the basis for them, as it is said, as many scholars say. However, but these two school religions are different than the aforementioned six philosophical schools, and the different way of thinking. They had a great advance in them. There was a lot of freedom of the way of thinking, and so these became the most complete. So after the most, they appeared after the most complete, the complete development of other traditions. So for that, and whether we're speaking about the Jain tradition or the Buddhist tradition, neither of them actually accepted the Vedic traditions. They did not accept the Vedic texts. And so this is like a feature of these two. So whether we're speaking about the Jain or the Buddhist texts, the main teachings of them are the sutras. They were taught in the form of sutras and preserved in this fashion. And so they are considered the third category of sutra texts, the Jain and the Buddhist. But whether we're thinking about the Jude, but neither the Jain or the Buddhist texts appeared in written form during the Vedic period. It was only later that they had spread and were written down. During the time of the Buddha, the words of the Buddha were not written down. So the sutras of both of these religions did not appear during the Vedic period. So now, I mentioned the first type, the six branches of Veda as the first type of sutra. And so to give a brief introduction to them, when we talk about the six branches of Veda, or the six types of Vedic literature, the first branch is what we call ritual or kalpa. Kalpa or ritual. So it's a shiksha or perhaps kalpa. Now, the word, so this is translated into Tibetan as ritual. Now, in this category, there are three different categories, or three different sets of sutras: the Sutra of Listening, the Sutra of Dharma, and the Sutra of Household Life, the Shrauta Sutra, the Dharma Sutra, and the Grihya Sutra. Now, the Shrauta Sutra, or the Sutra of Listening, so this Sutra of Listening is called the Shrauta Sutra. And the reason why it's called the Sutra of Listening is that it explains the rituals found in the Vedas very simply. The next is the Dharma Sutras, the Sutras of Dharma. So what these are very important texts. And the reason why they're such significant texts is that they describe the customs and habits of the time, and also the laws and legal traditions of that time. So for this reason, the Dharma Sutras have become a very important historical source. Later, there's a type, the text we call the Manusmriti that I mentioned the other day. And so the Manusmriti text was formed primarily, or many of the points of the Dharma Sutras became an integral part of the Manusmriti. So at that time in India, the way they taught these laws and traditions was that from a very young age, the children were made to memorize the laws. Children had to memorize the laws, and so that when they grew old, they knew what their responsibilities, their professions were, and they recognized this based on the texts that they had memorized as children, and so they practiced according to those texts. And so the way they practiced this is by making the children memorize these legal texts from the young age. However, these days, we don't have the entire Dharma Sutras. Many parts of it have been lost, and so we only have fragments left. It is not complete. The next type is what was called the Household Sutra. This Household Sutra is called the Grihya Sutra. What it teaches is whether you're a child or generally the sons, the husbands or the father, all of them had roles that they had to fulfill and responsibilities they had to carry for their family and the members of their family. And so the Grihya Sutra describes what their responsibilities are. What are like for an eldest son, what are their responsibilities? What rituals do they do? What are the responsibilities of a father? And so these are described and so they speak a lot about the ways one should get married or have children. It speaks about breastfeeding, education, and so forth. All of these are described in great detail. It also describes the many different rituals that are associated with the household, and also the different religious rituals that the leaders of a household had to perform. And each of these is described clearly in order. So this sutra, the household, or the Grihya Sutra, if we research the Grihya Sutra, what we can learn from it is how people led their lives at that time. We can understand this, learn this clearly from this sutra. So these three sutras, the listening sutra, the sutra of Dharma, and the sutra of household life, are all what we call here the sutras of ritual or kalpa. The general name is kalpa. Now, when we speak about the sutras of rituals, of course, in different traditions and in different regions, there are their own particular sutras now, but only a few of them remain today. Only a few fragments remain today. Now, the second is what we call reading. Now, what reading means here is, it's called shiksha in Sanskrit. What shiksha means is when you're reciting the words of the Vedas, what are the pronunciations? What are the strong sounds, the soft sounds? What are the how is the pronunciation done? What are the places of origin of each of the letters, and so forth? And the reason for studying this is that for many generations, the Vedas had been preserved through memorization and recited from memory. And when you're reciting them from memory, if a single word was mistaken, then this is thought to be like an offense against the gods. So you could not mistake even a single word. If you're not allowed to get even one word wrong, then you need to understand the nature of the vowels, the strength of the weight of the letters, and also the how you had to hold your tongue. Did they come from the palate or the gut, or the guttural or the labial or so forth? You had to understand all of this so that you would be able to recite them without getting even a single letter wrong. And so they had such great interest and to this that they developed this genre called the reading. Now we did have these. No, we do have some texts on this. There are many texts on how to read the mantras, but no one studies them anymore. This means like how do you say that? How do you pronounce this? There are texts in Tibetan. How do you recite the mantras? And these are very similar to these texts on the reading sutras. But if you read what's written in the text on mantras, and if you look, but no one looks to see whether the way we recite mantras now actually matches what's described in these texts on mantras. Perhaps there is possible that there are a few scholars who take interest in it, but usually no one takes any interest in this. So even within our text in Sutra, we said we have to pronounce the mantras properly. We need to pronounce it. They say it is important to pronounce them properly, and it's important that they not decline. And so there's a great interest to this earlier in the Vedic period, and so that is probably the reason why. Now, the source for the text on reciting the mantras again is that they originally from the Buddhist texts originally, but every from. And so these texts were taken out of the Buddhism, and they're made into a separate tradition and became important for that reason. Now, the third branch of the Vedas is are we on the third or the fourth? It's the third. I think I've got it mixed up. I think this is the third. The third is poetics. Yes. I think I got this a little mixed up. And maybe it's better to take a break now. It's best to take the break here. I've got too busy. So we will take a 30-minute break and reconvene after 30 minutes.